This is where we often talk to someone who is reasonably well known or, has got an interesting story to tell.
Can play guitar, sing or something.
Yeah, I don't know whether this bloke can play guitar and sing like ringing a bell, but he's interesting and he can talk. So let's have a chat to him. His name is Hamish McLachlan. G'day, Hamish.
Da, da, da. Da, da. It's the best part of the song. I don't know why you cut that off.
Yeah, well, there's various versions of it, you understand, and the version I selected out of my extensive library.
I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed.
Yeah, no, and you know what? It was something my mother said to me for much of my childhood.
Oh, dear me. Hamish, good morning and welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show.
Thanks, nice to be on. Ross Stevenson gave me a text and said, best radio show in the world, you should try and get on. So I've been trying to get on for months.
Yeah. Not convincing, but let's run with it anyway. So you are a good mate of Ross's, obviously, and we'll talk a little bit about your podcast along the way. But let's take it back. People know of you from, I guess, from two primary areas, and that is sticking your head on TV, talking about racing, and also talking a bit about footy. So where does it all start? How does someone like you get involved in doing what you do?
Well, if you get right back, I grew up on a farm in South Australia, a sheep farm. We used to ride the horses around, and on the weekends, Dad used to muck around with some horses at the local polo club, which sounds quite sort of highfalutin. It wasn't at all. It was very basic. It was always about 43 degrees, and we used to have to put up the goalposts, get the speakers going for the tournaments, and make sure that everything was ready to go. And one day, the commentator, who just was really a ground announcer, didn't turn up. And I said to Dad, Reg Willing hasn't turned up, Dad, what should I do? And he said, well, if you can find someone that talks more than you can, get them to do it, otherwise you do it. So I started doing it. Mate sitting next to me said, you got to keep commentating, don't just do the ground announcing. So I commentated a game, and one thing led to another, and did the next weekend and the next weekend, then did the World Championships, which happened to be in Melbourne, then got flown to England because a mate called Andrew Hines had come to England, Australia, the Queen's Ground in Windsor this year, did that, did the presentations with Harry and William. They asked me to stay for a charity weekend and kept talking. And then I came back a few years later, and a guy from Channel 7 said, I've been seeing what you're doing, a guy called Lewis Martin. He said, do you want to do a pilot? I didn't know what that was, but I did one. They said, you're no good. And I said, could I have another go? But I don't want to read auto cue. And they said, have another go. And I asked Gillen and Nathan Buckley, Nick Holland, and I think Grant Hackett from memory just to do a panel with me. And they said, that's better. A month or two later, they said, do you want to do a footy show? And that was game day back in 2008. So it started with a bloke not turning up at Waterloo Corner out the back of Adelaide, and it ended with sort of a lucky, opportunistic few moments, like life, I guess, often is.
Yeah, it is indeed. And that story didn't start off highfalutin, but it got highfalutin very quickly, Hamish.
Well, now, I can't believe the parallels between your life and mine. I was asked to fill in calling a VFL game once out at Casey Fields, and I got to call about 150, 160 games of VFL football, and along with a couple of your old colleagues, of course, and here I am on a Saturday morning doing community radio in Geelong, and it's so similar, isn't it?
It's subtly different.
Yeah.
May I point out?
You're doing very well anyway.
Thank you very much. So the interest in sport has always been there, obviously.
I've always absolutely loved sport. I grew up one of four brothers, and our whole youth was spent either moving sheep, drenching sheep, or kicking a football while the sheep were sort of happy. And Gillen used to pretend he was Rick Davies, who was the big full forward for Sturt. I used to say that I was Michael Aish, who was a sort of the wiry outside runner, and that sort of suited me. And it's amazing. I said to Gil, we're about to go and do the Brownlow medal 2 or 3 years ago. And I sort of looked at him and he looked at me, and we were just on stage before the broadcast started. I said, this is pretty weird, isn't it? Both sort of watched the McGarry medal and the Brownlow medal in awe, and now we're both involved in it. So it's funny how your paths sort of float about and end up in scenarios that I'm not sure whether you wish it or will it or hope more than anything else. But it's been filled with sport. I played a lot of tennis. I got to a pretty reasonable level, and then I blew up my knee. I ended up having a couple of knee reconstructions and 9 knee ops in the end. But I always just loved sport, whether it was... it's funny now. We spoke, Neil, before. I've driven half an hour to watch a mate from Perth, Boyd, play in Mentone. I think it's about under 12s. They've flown over from Perth, must be a rep team. I can watch sport at any level. I live on a park which has got a few ovals in it, and the kids and I will go out and watch training. The other night, we went and watched some training. Indy is my daughter. She's 11. Lex is 9. We used to go and watch training. But the joy of watching training is, as much for me as, I enjoy that as much as calling a game of football on a Thursday night. It's just a huge part of my life. I love the competition. I love the camaraderie. I love mateship that it all builds. I love the fact that you've got a common goal, helping people out. People that are, sort of ostracised at times find that sport brings them into a community and suddenly their life opens up. I think it's just a wonderful part of life, and I'm glad my kids all play.
Yeah, it's a very, very important part. Just on the sports side's good, but for you, the higher level stuff started with a microphone. So for you to go and commentate on that polo game, there had to have been something that was going around in your head that had been inspired or triggered by someone else. Were you a great listener to commentary when you were young as well as watching the game?
The sounds of summer for me were Richie Beno and Tony Gregg and Bill Laurie. And I used to sort of work my weekends around when the test match started, or back then it was 50 over cricket. But I loved watching the sport, but I also loved listening to the sport. And I remember doing a project in 1984, I was year 4, on the Olympics. And I remember thinking that was something that seemed very far away, but I remember the commentary sort of brought it to life. And when Dean Lucan, the South Australian tuna fisherman, won gold, I thought, if he can win it's sort of open for everyone. Everyone maybe can get to where they want to be. And then I met Ken Cunningham, and I met Graham Corns, and I met Bruce McAvaney, all at different phases of my life when I was really young. And I always thought that if you couldn't play it, for whatever reason that was, injury or genetic deficiency, it would be always nice to talk about it. And again, I'm not quite sure how or why. I always harboured dreams of doing it, but I went and did commerce at university, was working for Craig Kelly, who was by chance my childhood hero when he played for Norwood. Then he went over and played for Collingwood and won the flag in 1990. And when I moved to Melbourne in 1998 after finishing uni in 96, travelled the world in 97, I went looking for a job. I wrote a few letters, and somebody said to me, why don't you go and introduce yourself to Craig Kelly? And he just started up a sports management group, went and worked for him for a few years, and was managing players and running events with footballers, but never really thought that the broadcasting life would come to be. And he said to me, do you want to head up my events and entertainment business? And I said, sure. And I'm in charge of the budget at that point. I said, why are we paying MCs money to host these lunches? He said, well, someone's got to do it. I said, if I do it, I get to save the money in my budget. He said, well, you do it. So I started hosting a few lunches, and then a couple of people said, oh, you did a good job, you should do it next week. And it's just a really fun part of my life now, meeting people, talking with people. I do a show called Unfiltered. Adam Sard yesterday from Suns, then Bombers, now Blues, just got an incredible story, overlooked in 3 drafts. Last week, I sat down and did an interview with Neil Danaher, and that sounds a bit odd given he now can't speak, but what we did was, for 3 or 4 months, we just sent emails and text messages to each other, and when all of his text and copy was ready, we got all of his answers and put it into his voice using AI. So I asked questions the other day, and he would hit send, and he would have the answers basically produced in front of me. And it was one of the more thrilling experiences of my life, hearing his voice again and hearing his thoughts on the questions that I had asked. It was, it's been a privilege to do it all, and I've been feeling very fortunate all the way along. It never gets tiring or boring, and I love it.
Because I think the other thing, without wishing to blow too much smoke into a particular part of your body, one of the things that, the football telecast, if you like, have now become very much, we'll do what the other guys are doing. The thing I like about the unfiltered component is we're not hearing the stories of Patrick Dangerfield or Marcus Bontempelli or the same faces that we see all the time, that you're actually getting to talk to people who've got a story and being able to go through and talk to some. The one I particularly liked as a Brisbane Lions man was the Craig McRae conversation that you had, where, the poor bloke was literally moved to tears by some of the conversations he was having. It's just really powerful TV, I reckon.
Well, Thank you. When we watch these players, for some reason we sort of put them all in a group of superheroes, but the reality is they all get up in the morning, go to the loo, have a shave, get their gear off, put their gear on and go and make a living. There's a lot of layers behind all of these superheroes that we call AFL players and AFL coaches, but they're all, fundamentally humans that are doing great things, but their stories are so layered. And I said to Chris Jones, who's now the head of sport at Seven, go back one step. He said, "Are you going to come back?" Because I took a year off last year with the kids and travelled the world. He said, "Are you going to come back?" And I said, yeah, absolutely. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, well, my kids are at an age now where I'd love to watch them play sport and coach them. So I'd love to do, Thursday night football and sort of keep the Sunday spare because Seven doesn't have the AFL on Saturdays. He said, "Can I get you to think about doing a show?" I said, "What are you thinking?" And the agenda setters, that sort of newsy stuff isn't really my go, and because of the reason that we're now discussing, I just love the stories. And he said, "What about you do a one-on-one show and you just do what you really enjoy doing, and that's talking to these people about their lives?" So he was very generous in giving it to me, but then what he was incredibly good at doing was saying, do whatever you think is going to work best. And I said, well, I just need 2 milk crates and a warehouse. I want to make it as simple as possible and make the player, and his content the king. And he said, great. Who do you want to produce? I said, Glenn Postel, we're doing a lot of things together. He gets me, and he's not overpowering. So it's a very easy piece. Like yesterday, Adam Sard, 2 chairs in the middle of their indoor training centre, a couple of cameras, walk in a pair of jeans and a shirt, sit down and just chat for an hour. And, there's no light, studio audience, canned laughter, guy whooping everyone up. It's just like, I think my first question was, how do you get overlooked in 3 drafts, 2 rookie drafts, and end up being an All-Australian playing 200 games? It's like, a lot of times when I was going to give up, I was broke and I thought I was embarrassing myself and my Muslim community, but I just thought that God would make it happen. It's like, okay, here we go. This is going to be interesting. And you just have this fascinating chat with this guy. I love watching Adam Sard play. It's like, do you know where you're going when you start bouncing? He goes, no, I don't. I said, do your teammates? No. So, okay. What happens? He goes, well, I don't really know, but it all seems to work out. Just like, okay. And that's the fun stuff for me. I mean, we all know how they play. You can go and look up their wins and losses and touches and disposals, but the stuff that he wants to be a fisherman, but he gets so seasick he can't go out. He's got to stay on piers. Anyway, that's the stuff I love.
Yeah, well, I do too. I was talking to a former age journalist who actually returned to write a very, very good article, or a couple of articles about concussion in the last few weeks. Peter Hanlon, another Birregurra boy who you probably know.
I was speaking to Pete the other day. There's some very good journalists in this country. I reckon Pete is a 7-time All-Australian and probably 4-time All-Australian captain of good articles.
Yeah, I agree, and also class him as a friend now because of the connection to that community. And it's really good to see someone who does this. He looks for the stories that are behind the stories that I think as a sports lover are the ones that I appreciate most. So what you've just said then has sort of got the hair on the back of the neck standing up, and I wish we had more of it. There's been an article this week about Tommy Atkins at Geelong. They're the stories for me, rather than I'm done with Dangerfield and Cameron, as much as I love them. Let's find out more about the other stuff. And you've really returned my faith in the game.
You'll love one in the next few weeks. So Neil is coming up is this Wednesday, and I think if I do anything, I should rephrase that. I don't think I'll do anything that I will be more proud of than giving Neil a voice again. So that'd be fantastic. But one, you speak about these stories, Neil. Chankwath Jaff, I recorded a couple of weeks ago when I did the Cal Shadir story about his father passing. But Chankwath Jaff's father, 10 or 11, is given a gun and told to be a child soldier in South Sudan to fight North Sudan in the Civil War. He then gets to a point where he's a pastor and has a family, and he thinks this is just so outrageously dangerous. He grabs his 3 children of the time. They walk for 7 days to Ethiopia They're passing families that are lying on the side of the road that haven't been able to make it and have passed away. They finally get to Ethiopia, get to a refugee camp. In that refugee camp, they have more children, including CJ. CJ grows up in the Ethiopian refugee camp, and at 6, the family gets accepted to come to Australia. They leave the refugee camp. They jump on a plane. CJ doesn't speak a word of English. He's watching A Night at the Museum with Ben Stiller, not knowing how the people got into the back of the chair, which happens to be a TV, which he's never seen in his life before. His sporting career is kicking around a balloon wrapped in cloth. Turns up in Melbourne, in Dandenong, then gets moved to Morwell, where his father's a pastor. He's never played football in his life. At 12, he gets asked to play a game. Doesn't know any of the rules. By 16, he's on a scholarship to Xavier. And then he gets drafted to the Hawks, and his first night, he debuts in the snow against GWS in Canberra. It's like, try and piece all that together.
I saw him play his first VFL game at Box Hill City Oval. I called that game. And Stewie Ward, I don't know if you met Stewie along the way, just one of the gentlemen in football. He was the football manager of Box Hill. And we went to Stewie and said, nah, you're going to have to help us. What do we call him? And he said, oh, geez, I don't know. Hang on. So he comes back 5 minutes later. He goes, no, we've all agreed he's going to be CJ. Because none of us could pronounce his name. And none of the players could pronounce his name. It was just really quite an extraordinary cultural shock for him to lob. I mean, it doesn't get much more eastern suburbs than the corner of Middleborough Road and Whitehorse Road in Box Hill. And there he is running around in his Box Hill jumper.
He's just a superhuman. So I've got a 9-year-old son who barracks for the Hawks. I'm a cat, sort of quite controversial, but first day of kindy, a good kid got to him and he's never changed. His favourite player is CJ. And I was talking to CJ when we were doing the filming, and he signed Lex's jumper. And then we sent Lex a video message, and then Lex sent one back. And CJ and Lex just trade video messages, and it's just this beautiful relationship between, you know, a South Sudanese refugee and a Australian 9-year-old blonde kid that. Just they bond over football. How incredible is that?
Yeah, well, make more of those stories, Hamish, because they are good and they make people like me remember why we love the game, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it just also helps people remember that these players are people. You know, they're doing incredible things on an oval, but they go home to ill parents or a father who's passed and a mother who's grieving or a brother who's sick or it's just layer upon layer upon layer, and that's why I cringe a little bit when, people are criticised by what they've done on the field. You have no idea what's happening at home.
Hamish, go back. You mentioned Richie Benaud, a man who was famous for saying, if it doesn't add anything to the broadcast, don't say it. In a day of modern commentary where some like to be bigger than the game, you seem to operate under Richie's guidelines. Was that intentional, or is that just something that happened naturally in your development?
Richie, I thought, was as good as it could ever get. So I guess you try and take bits and pieces from people you like. I've never heard anyone say, gee, I wish the commentator would speak more. and that's a bit of a mantra of mine when people ask for any advice, if they do. Abby Holmes she's an absolute ripper. When I went away, she started doing a lot of the hosting, and she said, have you got any hints? And it was a bit like you just suggested, Ben. It's like, if you can ask a question in 25 words, you can probably do it in 15. If you can do it in 15, you can probably do it in 6. And she'd give me an example. I said, well, Sam Lawler, for example, he's number 1 draft pick, goes to the Tigers. We all know his story. Great cricketer, scholarship at Geelong, arrives. Everyone's excited. Plays the Blues on the opening night. And I said to Abs, if I was going to interview him, rather than give all that palaver which everyone knows and sort of try and insert yourself, you'd walk up and smile and just say, nervous? And he knows exactly what you're asking, and everyone knows the story. Just let him talk. And I think, for me, they're the stars of the game. I've never played at AFL level, never coached at AFL level, and never will do either. So I feel very privileged to be there. But my role is to try and get the best out of everyone else, not talk too much. If I'm doing that in any way, shape or form, I feel like I'm doing my job. If I'm talking too much, then I'm not only annoying Neil, I'm annoying my mum and my dad and everyone watching.
Yeah. So couple of things before we let you go, because I know you've taken some time out of watching sport. We heard the whistle blow a couple of times behind you there.
Worked any better. I got told it was a 10 a.m. game. They're lining up, about to get going about, I reckon it must be a 10:30 game. So the first time in my life I'm early.
Yeah, and sorry to have interrupted, but two things. One, there is a podcast that we should acknowledge that you do with Ross, who is officially a friend of the show. You'll need to come back another time to become a friend of the show, because you're going to be on twice. That's the rule.
Okay.
Disappointed to hear that you've let that, what he's called artificial and the intelligence, get a foothold in there. I don't know how that happened. But it just seems like a bit of fun. If you love your horse racing, just get on and listen to a couple of blokes talking about their passion.
We ended up, I remember how this actually started. You can always trace things back. When I was at 7, I was in one of the sports departments, and at the time Tim Warner was in charge. One of his mates was called Scott Perrin. Scott Perrin owned a lot of horses, but he was in charge of racing.com at the time, and he said to me, I want you to do a horse racing show. It's like, where? He said, on racing.com, because Seven had an interest in racing.com. I said, no problem. But I'm not going to talk about punting or breeding. I don't want to give any tips. He goes, what are you left with? I said, we'll work it out. And he said, who are you going to do it with? I said, there's 2 people I'd love to do it with. One won't do it. The other's got a 33% chance. Who's the first one? Bruce. He goes, well, he won't do it. But in the wrong state, and he doesn't like idiocy. And then he said, who's your other? I said, Ross Stevenson. I said, I reckon Roscoe would do this. Roscoe had never done television at the time. I rang, I said, what do you think? He said, let's go and have a coffee and talk about it. Now, that show was called That's Racing, and at the coffee, we did, on the back of a napkin, a rundown, and we went back to racing.com and said, there's your show. And they said, that doesn't seem to focus on anything in particular at all. I said, well, have you ever heard Ross on radio? He can pull apart something and find thread on thread on thread. Anyway, That's Racing, which I had enormous fun doing. We used to do it instead of having a coffee. And then when I went away, Roscoe said, well, why don't we do the racing podcast? Sorry, the racing show as a podcast, and it's called Two Each Way. And again, it's instead of going and having a coffee or going for a walk, he puts on a set of headphones, and I do the same, and you're never quite sure where it's going to go.
And they're the ones that work the best, Hamish.
Yeah.
We had Ross on for our 200th show, I think, with Ian Cover, and we gave them 15 minutes. After 53 minutes, I said, hey, boys, Rob didn't get a look in. I think I asked 4 questions, and that was it. The rest of them so yes, he does do that. The other one we should just highlight is that, in fact, Ross came up with the idea on radio the other morning, and I was talking to him yesterday about it. The importance of country football clubs, particularly in Western Victoria at the moment. We're encouraging people to join a football club. I joined Hayward during the week, and Rob has joined Keith Crow's. An endorsement of that idea from you would be good, and maybe you could even suggest a club you're going to join.
Well, I did this a few years ago when Port Melbourne were in trouble, and I've always tried to support Norwood Footy Club. I was a member, should rejoin actually, for the Redlegs. But I am involved in the Red Hill Footy Club, even though we're not there anymore. I always do their season launch and try and help them fundraise. Sort of comes back to what we were talking about before in terms of how important they are. It's funny you say this. Last weekend, I went back to South Australia, and my father, I said, let's go up to the farm to my little brother Will, who's up there. He coaches the Onkaparinga girls team, has for a number of years with his best mate. Never played for Onkaparinga, but got involved and got asked.
Please tell me that they have a blanket defence.
They have a what?
A blanket defence at Onkaparinga.
Oh, yeah, no, they flood back all the time. Playing the loose woman in defence. So Will, who's my brother, he's involved in the country football there with his great mate James Jordan, and I said, let's go up and see Will at the farm. They're in a drought and horrific, and they've been feeding for 8 months, and it's pretty sad. And we're driving in, and I had Dad in the passenger seat and a mate of ours in the back, and as we're driving through the main street of Mount Pleasant, I pulled in. He said, what are we doing? I said, I just want to show you something. There was no one playing. It was Monday, I think. We pulled in to the country ground. I pulled up to the fence. He said, why are we pulling up here? I said, I remember, because I used to watch the Mount Pleasant Kangaroos, which is my country town in South Australia. 250 people live there. And whoever played for the seniors was sort of my heroes, Norwood and the Mount Pleasant Kangaroos. And one day we were sitting where we pulled up, and they were running hard at a loose ball on the boundary at about sort of in between wing and half-back. And the guy that was about to pick up the ball did his hamstring, couldn't pull up, went over the fence and landed on the bonnet of our car. It was Gillen and I and Dad watching the seniors on a Saturday afternoon. We must have been coming back from doing something because we're in the highlights. And I remember the guy through the windscreen at the three of us, and Dad was just eating a pie. He goes, "Hammy?" He goes, "Hammy." It was just, but that, for all the reasons you guys talk about, I love country football. I love football, sport of any time. And Birregurra, I mean, when we moved to Birri, Mum and Dad had separated. Mum had her mother at Dunkeld. We were in Melbourne working. She sort of picked a midpoint in Birri. And I remember early on, there was a bit of a, there was chatter going around Birregurra and Wimtrelsea that, you know, Gillen and Hamish were about the place a little bit. And I think both clubs could see an opportunity to grab potential fundraising assets. So, you know, and anyway, long story short, last week, Gillen rang while Will, little brother, and Dad and I were on the farm. I said, you know what we've got to do? We've got to fill the town hall while we've still got any sort of relevance at all and raise some money to make sure the clubhouse and everything is there for another 100 years, because it's all getting, you know, pretty lean and not a lot of money in the community at the moment. But the football, you know, seems to be a gathering point still and puts a smile on people's faces, and, you know, it's a great way to spend a weekend.
Well, I was there last week for their game against Apollo Bay, and it very much needs a revamp of the club rooms. I think they're the same ones they were changing in the 1950s. So if you could put a bit towards that, I'm sure the town will be greatly appreciative. It is a classic case of how important that football netball club is to that community, and they're right across Australia. So that focus now is chip in and support, because never before have they been needed more than they're needed now.
So I think the rule of this is that you can't choose a Geelong Football League, Bellarine Football League or Geelong and District Football League membership, because you already should have one of those. We want everyone listening to put their hand in their pocket, find 50 or 60 bucks and join a football club somewhere between here and metropolitan Adelaide, where things are pretty dire.
That's awesome. It's such a great initiative. I mean, it's, yeah, if you've got a bit of a groundswell, it's amazing. Neil Danaher, Big Freeze next weekend, he was hoping to raise a couple $100,000 through the Big Freeze. I reckon he's through $100 million and surging towards $200 million. It's amazing how movements can happen. On Friday nights, my kids play at the local footy club in Pram, and it is the best night of the week. 4 till 5 my kids train. I reckon we leave about 7 after 5 sausages, and they hang around and kick the footies, and parents chat and decompress after the week. Melting pot of people. It's awesome. Great game, sports, great part of our lives.
Yeah, very much so.
Hamish McLachlan, thank you for the role you play in that. Thanks for taking some time out of your Saturday morning. The game will have started, so we're 4 minutes into the first quarter. We won't get you to do it around the grounds because that would be unfair. We hope to chat again somewhere down the track.
St Bede's Mentone Tigers, 2 behind. Potterslow Magpies yet to score. Quarter 1, we played, I assume this is a 15-minute quarter. We've got 7:55 on the clock.
And, of course, brought to you around the grounds by Geelong Line Marking.
Correct. You ring me back any Saturday because I need to become a friend of the show.
Excellent. Thanks, Hamish.
Really
Cheers, mate.
appreciate it.
All the best.
Pleasure.